Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I want to quickly give you my thoughts on House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. You've probably heard about this book if you're into horror novels. It's constantly talked about. It's a very popular book. And I finished it probably late December this past year. It took me a while to read. It's a pretty big book. It's about 700 pages long, but I just wanted to quickly review this, and this will have no spoilers, and I don't want to ruin the fun. So, what is this book about? It's quite a wild one. It's basically about a two main stories. The first one is about a guy named Johnny Truant, and he's kind of a deadbeat, kind of dead end guy, druggy kind of guy living in LA. And I believe some of this is not quite as fresh in my mind, but I think in his apartment building, he finds a manuscript left by a guy who lived there named Zampano, who's credited as the author of this book if you start reading it. And it's basically a academic text that is it reads almost like a dissertation, I would say, or an academic text about a documentary called The Navidson Record, which documents the other story in this about a guy named Will Navidson and his family who essentially get a house that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And the house starts shifting around and all sorts of crazy, weird, creepy stuff starts happening. And they decide in that text to explore the house and go on a sort of expedition of this constantly changing, creepy house. Now, Johnny Truant's sections are written in a style of like almost like a parody of like Thomas Pynchon. A lot of goofy character names and situations that would not be out of place in an author's book like that. And it's written honestly, in my opinion, like a parody of that sort of postmodern literature, though it can often be quite disturbing and dark. And you, with his sections, they're written in a Courier font. They're almost written as like this is an epistolary sort of novel, so they're almost written in a like a diary format or like a journal entry format. Um, Let me show you what those look like. So, like I said, they're written in Courier, and you're not going to be able to read this, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So that's like almost like a typewriter. And then the Navidson sections are written, like I said, like academically, and they look like a dissertation or a sort of collegiate text or something, and they essentially look like this. Okay? Those are written, I believe, in Times New Roman. And you'll see all sorts of colors and all sorts of stuff, and you see right there's a box of text and all that. Danielewski plays around with a lot of different things here, a lot of weird formatting tricks that you've probably never seen before in a book. And so you basically have Truant going through this book and adding his own footnotes and stuff interspersed with his journal entries that get more and more rambly, and you often are reading like what's the term for it? Like stream of consciousness writing, like borderline at times incoherent, like rambling. Whereas, cut with the Navidson Record, which is more like reading a account of a documentary film that has all sorts of different people and experts commenting on it with footnotes and all that kind of stuff. So it's like a story within a story within a story. It's crazy. Um, yeah, so what did I think about this? This took me a while to read. I actually stopped reading it at one point, and a lot of people say like don't do that, and I think I would recommend like just go and do this in one shot. It's a really hard book to stop and start again. But honestly, I really like this like more than I thought I would. I really thought this was excellent. Um, it's like first off, I found it to be a pretty difficult read just all around. The way that the text is formatted is difficult to just get through the book. The academic stuff can be like really dry sometimes, and like really difficult to like above like my understanding. And then you also have truant sections, like I said, get more and more incoherent to where I'm like I have no idea what he's talking about or what's going on. But it's like one of those books where if you stick with it, it all comes together, and there's just so many things going on in this book. Now, I don't like to spoil things here, and I also don't like to get too much into the themes of the book because I often find that's the most fun of reading is figuring out like what the book is trying to say or what the author's trying to say. Just to get into it a little bit though, I often feel like a lot of times in this book it was about like facing your fears or having to go through something to come out on the other side. And all of those characters do that in their own way through all of these stories. And the central thing in the house that's the house, excuse me, I misspoke, but it's the house that is linking all of this together. It's like the house is this idea in this book that is the sort of catalyst for all of these different stories that you're reading. So it's really, really interesting, but I really thought this was a challenging read. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people talk about this as a horror novel, and I would describe this as like totally experimental psychological horror. And one thing I wanted to say that I find interesting, and of course, I want to preface this by saying you can read a book any way you want, of course, however you want to read, your preferences, of course. But I see people talk about this, and it's like, I see this with other books too, horror books in particular. Like, the only qualifier for if it's good is like if it's scary. It's almost like people read books sometimes, and I feel like like stuff goes just over their head, or they like ignore anything that isn't the horror aspect, and that's it. It's like the only qualifier for a good book, and it's like, well, I didn't find this scary, so it sucked. And it's like, okay, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of strange. Nothing really scares me in terms of like books and movies, really. I'm a horror fan, so like I'm totally desensitized to that. So it's not like this book was like terrifying to me, but it's just so incredibly well written and so dense. And I constantly, when I was reading this, was just thinking this had to be a nightmare to put together. Though I will say, specifically in the Davidson record, the academic side of the book, there are some moments that are really freaky. Like this book gives you a feeling of total isolation when they're going through this changing house, and it gives you this feeling that like you almost shouldn't be reading this. Like you're reading someone's like just nightmare. Really, it definitely has a very sort of creepy, isolating feel to it at times. In terms of the way it's formatted, like I said, very experimental. I'm not going to show you because I don't want to spoil it. You've probably seen some of it before, but I want you to experience it yourself. I would say like 80% of it worked for me, 20% didn't. Sometimes I felt like what the author was trying to do kind of felt gimmicky. Like, okay, I get it. I kind of want to get on to like the regular formatted text and get back to the story. And also like some of Johnny Truant's sections, and this isn't like a weird opinion. I think a lot of people feel like this. They tend to not like Johnny Truant's sections as much because they can get so like incoherent. I was like, I don't really know what I'm reading. But the bulk of the text and the formatting really worked. Like there were a lot of times reading this where the way it was formatted was so bizarre and it like clicked like, oh, I think I get what he's trying to do here, and it's very unique. So it's a really unique reading experience. You have a lot of interesting stories in here and some just great writing to read. And it's also, you're reading it in a way that is very unusual that you don't get to do often. So for me, it was a success. It mostly worked and it was just a great read. What else could I say about this? One other thing, and again, going back to read however you want, but I do sometimes see people say stuff like, yeah, I just skipped the Johnny Truant stuff. I was more into the house stuff, the expedition through the house, the Davidson record. And it's like, you probably should read the whole thing. Like, I find that a little bit odd, like, to just skip massive sections of the book. Maybe on a reread, if that wasn't, your favorite thing, go back and read the stuff you like. But I definitely think that you should read the Johnny Truant stuff. Everything is connected in this book in one way or another, and you really need to read the whole thing to get the full picture and what's really going on in this book. One other thing is, it's kind of interesting. I felt like a lot of times Danielewski was like poking fun at this type of book. Like he took it to the max in this book of that sort of experimental postmodern work. Like he often was poking fun at almost like people who try to read too much into things by like formatting it in that way. But at the same time, and you do see that, like, right? Like, you see people like picking everything apart in this book. But at the same time, it is so dense that there's so much that you can read into. So it's like the best of both worlds. It's almost like a satire, but a really deep, thought-provoking sort of intellectual book. So yeah, definitely not for everybody. Quite a challenging read. One of the more difficult books I've read in a while. Though at the same time, once you get through like maybe the first quarter of the book, you start to get used to the way that the book is written, and it becomes much easier. So in some ways, it actually is a page turner because it's just you want to know what happens next. So House of Leaves, a very strange book, one I very much enjoyed. I'll probably read it again, and maybe not soon because it was such a like exhausting read, but definitely something I'm going to want to return to. I highly recommend it if any of that sounds interesting to you and you've never checked it out. It's definitely a cool read. And that's it. House of Leaves, man. I did my House of Leaves review. I'm officially a booktuber now, so like, yeah. Anyways, I'll be back with something sometime. Who knows? Yeah, who knows these days. I'm currently reading a book called The Instructions by Adam Levin. I've talked about him on this channel before. I've reviewed a couple of his books, and I really enjoy him. So that's a really funny book, a really good read so far. Quite a big one. It's a huge book. But yeah, I'll be back sometime soon. I hope everybody's well. Let me know if you've read this and what you thought of it. If you didn't like it, that's totally cool. Let me know why. And let me know what you're reading or anything like that. Peace. See you later.